a light in every home.
We are the Muslim Ummah, and each day that goes by, the harder we try. In gratitude we pray to Allah. Chosen as part of the best of mankind, we spread the word of Islam. Each man at each hour, in awe of his power, each flower, each tree.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to episode number 4, talking about Islam in Europe, the Islamic heritage, the forgotten Islamic heritage in Europe. I am Dr. Stef Keris Abu Yasser. I have done quite some research in the last couple of years and decades actually, since I've accepted Islam 20 years ago, and I have looked deeply into the subject of Islam in Europe, of the Muslims. How was Islam spread into Europe? How come that we have still Muslims in Europe? How come that there are generations of Muslims living in certain parts of Europe? Now, if we're looking into episode number 4, we will see that we will be busy with a big part of where I originate from. Talking about Greece, the Balkan Peninsula, we're talking about Turkey, talking about Inner Asia. Some of you have already most probably guessed, we're talking about the Turks, Turkish tribes. Now, the Turkish tribes, as you hear, is a plural. It's not just one tribe, and it was not just one Turkish people, but we're talking about the Turkish tribes, plural. Many of them who originate from exactly as you can see now in front of you. This is a map of Inner Asia. Now, if you pay a closer look, if you pay closer attention to that, it tells you where Eastern Turks came from, where the Turks in general originate from, if you can see Tibet, China, up to Mongolia. Now, it is a fact that many Turks would like to deny, simply because there seem to be some racist or racial prejudice against Mongolia or Mongolian people. So Turks have a problem being classified as Mongolian or even Asians. But as we have seen before in the other episodes, there are many European tribes, or many tribes that entered Europe from Asia as well. So there is nothing wrong with having origins or having roots in Asia. I have been criticized in the past by a lot of my Turkish brothers, a lot of my Turkish sisters, that I mention this fact that Turks originally come from Inner Asia, even from parts of Mongolia. Now, that does not mean that all the Turks are Mongolians. I'm not saying that. That just simply means that certain Turkish tribes came from certain parts of Asia, and certain Turkish tribes came from an area in Mongolia. Certain others came from the eastern province of China. Certain others came from further the inside of China. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, this whole area has still until nowadays a variety of Turkish tribes. They all speak Turkic languages, which all are related. The root is Turkish, but they're all still different people. The origins, of course, they are from what we can see now. They come from Inner Asia. So Turks originally are Asian people, and they moved from Inner Asia into Minor Asia, the part which is actually today Turkey. We call this Minor Asia. So when the Turks moved into this part, they actually came closer to Europe. And there was an interest from the Turkish side, of course, because they came closer to Constantinople. Let's not forget how close Constantinople is. Now, to give you a better idea of the origins of the Turks is this slide that I'm showing you now. It just gives you a little bit a better idea because of the color, the difference of the color, as you can see now. Now, this whole area, it's a massive area. It is not just Mongolia, but it's a massive area from the eastern Turkish, from eastern Turkey into all the way into Mongolia, northern China, which is the root where we can trace back the roots of the Turkish tribes. Again, tribes in plural, not one specific Turkish people, but many Turkish peoples and many Turkish tribes. Again, there seem to be nowadays, we should not forget, the influence of nationalism. Nationalism, unfortunately, has crept into our belief system, has crept into our Islam and into our society and into our ummah. So that nowadays we have Muslims who are trying to avoid any racial or ethnic grouping. Now, as I said before, there seemed to be an issue, there seemed to be a problem for certain Turkish people accepting that they're Asians. But again, so many Asian tribes moved and migrated to Europe and in the end became Europeans. There is nothing wrong with that matter. Turkey is part of Europe. It is not part of the European Union, but it is part of Europe. Now, being part of the European Union with 68 million Muslims is an issue. And this is something that we have to see. We just have to realize that this is one of the cultural problems and barrier that Turkey faces being accepted, being a full member of the European Union. The Turkish tribes that moved into Minor Asia, nowadays Turkey, settled there, and of the first tribes that settled actually there were the Seljuks. Not much is known in general about the Seljuks. Not much is known about the Seljuks simply because people are not really interested, strangely enough, or history is not focusing a lot on the Turkish tribes and on the Turks. And if at all there is something that's mentioned, then it's about the Ottoman Empire, which we will focus on, inshallah, very soon. Before the Ottomans came, there were the Seljuks, who lasted around 150 to 200, excuse me, who lasted around 150 to 200 years, which made them an integral part of nowadays Turkish society, an integral part of Turkish culture. The Ottomans played, of course, the major role. They were the ones that basically formed Turkey the way it developed within these centuries that are coming still after the Ottomans entered nowadays Turkey as well as the Balkan. The period before the rise of the Ottomans was characterized by the decline of the mighty Byzantine Empire. We should not forget, we had a mighty neighbor, the Byzantines, who actually had ruled throughout the Middle East, had ruled throughout North Africa, and were a threat to the coming Turks now. Now the Turks become a threat to the Byzantines, of course. And for the Byzantines, it is a very important fact to just simply state that yes, the fear that the Greeks nowadays still have inside of them, they still have this fear and the hatred towards the Turks, comes from that time. But one important fact that I would like to mention here to my viewers. 1204, a very significant date. If there is another date I want you to remember, the first date was 711, which we mentioned. We are talking about Tariq bin Ziyad entering Gibraltar, Spain. And the second date that I want you to remember is 1204, a very important date, because what happened then? The Fourth Crusade coming from Western Central Europe, mainly the Franks, they entered Constantinople, although the Byzantine Greeks at that time opened the gates for them because they thought these were the brethren coming from Europe. They opened the gates, and within hours there was a bloodbath in Constantinople. A bloodbath. Again, historical facts. It's not something that I mentioned just. These are historical facts, that when the Crusaders entered Constantinople, they destroyed the very basis of Constantinopolitan society, Byzantine society. And it is a very important fact to see that that's what destroyed Constantinople first, long before the Ottomans came in 1453, which is more than 200 years later. So 1204, the Fourth Crusade, stopped in Constantinople, although actually it was supposed to go to the Holy Land. Now, it is something that I think should make you think, should make you ponder about what has happened in the past. When the Greeks say nowadays it is the Ottomans who destroyed our civilization, we can clearly say no. Long before the Ottomans, the Europeans themselves already destroyed the very base of European civilization, the very base of Christian civilization in Byzantium, in Constantinople at that time. They already destroyed this. In their rage, they just entered Constantinople and they killed anybody they found in front of them. Again, these are historical facts. So long before this happened, long before the opening of Constantinople in 1453, which is the next date I want you to remember, long before that, Constantinople was already destroyed more than 200 years before. You can simply say, then what happened then? Why did it still take 250 years? Why did it take so long still for the Muslims to enter, to open Constantinople? Simply because they had problems themselves. The Mongols were coming from the other side. You know, they had to fight the Mongolians. They had to fight other people, other tribes. They had problems in the Asian borders. You know, and the Europeans were busy with themselves already. So there were problems from both sides. So these 200 years that they had, 250 years still, was a gap basically between the entrance of the Ottomans to Europe and the Europeans losing their might to the Ottoman Turks, as well as the Abbasids and the Muslims in general losing their might to the Turkish tribes that were coming now. So Islam was carried from now on under the Turkish flag and Turkish tribes. The Turkish tribes brought Islam into Europe, into Eastern Europe, into the Balkans, into Greece, and into nowadays, of course, Turkey. Now, the Ottomans did reached a wonderful achievement, and we have to acknowledge that. We just have to see that. The Arabs on the other side had lost their power and their might already. The Seljuks in the east of the Byzantine Empire were very weakened due to the invasions of the Mongols, as I mentioned before, and the Seljuk sultans were reduced to vassals. They were just simply vassals. The Mongols were not interested in a state structure and did not last very long. They did not last very long. Many of the Mongols later accepted Islam, mashallah. We should not forget that. And this is again, we can call it a miracle in history that people who are victorious over other people accept the people's religion. You know that the Mongols were victorious over the Muslims. Baghdad was sacked by the Mongols, but still the Mongols accepted Islam, mashallah. That is a miracle, mashallah. And I wonder if anybody has ever thought about that before. Now, during the 13th century, there was a kind of movement, especially in Asia, by Sufis, a Sufi movement. And the Sufi master Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi was the one who was very active. He was very, very actively going around and promoting Islam, or at least the Sufi branch of Islam. He introduced the Sufi Islam to the Turkish tribes. They accepted it easily and went on and became very strong Sufi believing Muslims, let's call it that way. Now, it is a branch of Islam. There are certain issues in Sufism we will discuss later, inshallah. Let's first go into the break, and we'll see you after the break, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Chosen as part of the best of mankind, we spread the word of Islam.
Tech Talk. We're going to look at how to create a website and which Islamic websites to actually visit. What inspired you to create your own website?
One of the challenges that we face every day, the site or the application should be accessible worldwide. I remember when I was younger, one of my friends asked me to convince his father to get him a desktop. Even the laptop, if you compared both of them in terms of cost, laptop roughly cost twice the money if you compared it with a desktop.
Hackers, the word hackers, most of the youth people are very interested about that word. They say, hey, I'd like to be a hacker, because there is a type of hacker doing great job. We call them white hat hacker.
chosen as part of the best of mankind. We spread the word of Islam.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to the second part of Europe's forgotten Islamic heritage. Now, this time we can even say Europe's forgotten Ottoman heritage, because this is the episode that we are discussing the beginning, the very beginning of the Ottoman entry on the picture in history, on the pictures of Europe and on the pictures at all. They come into history, they play an important role from now on. The Ottomans come slowly, and they will play an amazing role from the 1300s on. We mentioned before that before the Ottomans came, and a very important fact, that before 1453, before the opening of Constantinople by Sultan Mehmed Fatih, before this happened, a very important fact happened. 1204, the Fourth Crusade, by European Franks, by the Franks. They were the ones who actually entered Constantinople, destroyed the city, destroyed a very big part of the city, and massacred an amazingly high number of people. We don't have the exact number, but we're talking about a bloodbath. And these are sources that we have, Western sources. These are not Muslim sources that I'm talking about. And I'm not quoting any Muslim source at this moment, because I know that it wouldn't sound incredible, you know. And of course they would say, of course, doctor, you're going to mention, of course, Muslim sources. You're going to mention what the Muslims said and how they described the Europeans, how terrible they used to be. But we're talking about European sources mentioning the bloodbath of Constantinople in 1204. After that, yes, the opening of Constantinople in 1453 by Sultan Mahmud Fatih. Now, one important thing before we moved on again, just a quick reminder. The Turkish tribes accepted Islam through the hands of Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi, who was a Sufi master, who was the one who was actually propagating Sufism, a branch of Islam which can go into extremes sometimes. We're talking about whirling dervishes. I'm sure that most of us have seen that already in Turkey. Whirling dervishes who think that they can unite with God, with Allah. Now, obviously, this is something that is not the base of our Islam, not at all. Now, still, I would like to mention this because it will play an important role. It will play an important role. Many Muslims who accepted Islam later in the Balkan countries, in Greece and Albania and Bulgaria and Romania, most of these people who accepted Islam through the hands of the Ottomans accepted Sufism as well. And this created problems later. Even it went to the part that we discussed, I think in episode 1, we mentioned that created another sect, Bektashism, which is a sect which was developed entirely in the Balkans, only actually. It did not go further outside of the Balkans. You cannot find this sect in Africa, you cannot find this sect in the Middle East, you cannot find this sect in Asia. It is something that exists just in the Balkans. And the leaders of the sect have no problem using alcohol, have no problem just simply not promoting the basis of Islam, the 5 pillars of Islam. Salah is one of them. They are not very keen in praying 5 times a day. The Quran is considered a book, okay, and that's basically a little bit the basis. There is not a lot of emphasis on the basis of Islam. The emphasis is on coming closer to God, coming closer to Allah with certain dhikr sessions that they use, which again are contrary to Islam. We have to mention this one because this will play an important role the more we go into Ottoman history. Now, seeing that after the Byzantines basically have lost their might, their power in the 13th century, the Seljuks also were losing their might and their power to the Mongols. The Mongols were basically just in a certain area and they stayed there, they did not move on anymore. There was a power vacuum. We're talking about a power vacuum between Asia and Europe. What happened between this power vacuum? who was the ruling elite? Who were the rulers during that time, the critical time of the 13th century, where the Crusaders on the one hand, the Mongols on the other hand, the Seljuks in between, the Turkish tribes here and there, different Turkish tribes wandering around in Asia, in Minor Asia especially. So what was happening exactly? Now, the power vacuum was actually the one that opened for the Ghazi leaders to come up. So these Ghazi leaders were independent leaders who ruled over small tribes and parcels of land. These Ghazis were Turkish warriors fighting for the faith of Islam, okay, Ghazi, and they were fighting against the infidels, they were fighting against the non-Muslims. Now, these specific Ghazis had a leader during that time. This leader was called Ertugrul, who was the father of Osman. Now, Uthman in Arabic, Osman in Turkish. Osman was basically the founder of the Ottoman dynasty, of the Ottoman Empire, which all happened in the 14th century, beginning 14th century, 1300s. Now, Ertugrul was a fantastic leader. He was the Ghazi who was actually admired by many, and many people wanted to join him, to join his battle against the Byzantines, and they wanted to join him against the Mongols also. Now, the Turks were the ones, and we can clearly say that, the Turks were the ones who kept the Mongols out of Europe. Europe was actually saved by the Turks. We have to look into this one very carefully. The Turks kept the Mongols out and kept this threat actually away from Europe. The founder of the Ottoman dynasty, as I said before, Osman, who was Ertugrul's son, was the first emir, not sultan and not caliph, of the Ottoman Empire. He was not a sultan. He was an emir. So he was ruling over an emirate. Okay? For a while, it was just an emirate. The first sultan to take control over the Ottoman Empire was actually his son, Orhan. Orhan Ghazi, as he is called. Orhan Ghazi, indeed. Now, we will go deeper into this one, inshallah. We will go deeper into this one. And I would like to, first of all, show you a small clip that I had the chance to make when I was in Turkey, in Istanbul. And I would like you to take a look at this architecture. It's an amazing piece of art. Just to give you an idea of what Ottoman architecture was about. The first piece I'm going to show you now is about Ottoman architecture in Greece, in my home country actually. As you can see here now, the typical structure of the Ottoman houses. You see the balconies. By the way, the idea of European balconies nowadays comes from that time. It is an Ottoman idea. The Ottomans were the first ones to come up with balconies, especially in Europe. And the balconies that, as you can see here, the balconies were basically just there for the women to be able, for the harem basically, for the women to come, to still be in their homes and protected by the walls, of course, in order not to be seen by the men, of course, from the street. They could still take a look out onto the streets and onto what's happening around them. So the Ottomans actually invented the balcony. And as you can see here, this that you just saw, the Ottoman structure of the balcony, is very much alive, still in the Balkan. That was a video of a piece of architecture in Greece, in the north of Greece, which is still there, The Ottomans indeed brought a lot of culture. In contrary to what people believe and what we were made to believe, because as I said before, I'm Greek myself. I used to go to Greek school and I used to hear all these myths and lies about how terrible these Turks were and how they massacred women and children and the whole entire Greek nation. And although I was young and I did not know that much, still I was wondering when I was 13, 14, 15 years old, when I was hearing all these myths, how come then still, if the Turks were so terrible and massacred all Greek women and children, how come we still have a Greek nation nowadays? And how come we still speak Greek? And how come How come that we basically have Greece the way it is and the rest? Because the same myths and stories that tell the Albanian children, the same myths and stories that tell the Bosnian children and the rest of the Balkan people, they all grow up with these myths. We can see here a wonderful fountain in Istanbul again, a fountain which is still in use. Worshippers can still go and make their wudu and still get ready for the prayer, for the salah. MashaAllah, this is an amazing piece of art, MashaAllah. And we will, inshallah, in the long run, see much more, many more pictures, many more videos about my trip in Istanbul and in Turkey, where we will be able to show some pieces of my documentary that I made at that time about the Ottoman Empire. Now, before we go further to that, before we actually go on at all, we have to finish this episode very soon. Now, with one general idea, the next episode will focus a bit more on how Osman, Orhan, and the founders of the Ottoman Empire, Osman himself, his son, and everybody who came after them, what kind of difficulties they had to face, how difficult or how easy was it to establish such an empire, and what a vast empire it was. Inshallah, I'm hoping to see you soon again, hoping to see you and welcoming you in the next episode. Jazakumullahu khair. I would like to thank you for your interest. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
We are the Muslim Ummah, and each day that goes by, the harder we try. In gratitude we pray to Allah. Chosen as part of the best of mankind, we spread the word of Islam. Each man at each hour, in awe of his power, each flower, each tree, everything that we see. Spread the word, oh man, spread the word of Islam. Oh, fortunate one, paradise must be won.